Welcome back to the National Hurricane Center. This is Ken Graham out here in operations, and back behind me is where we've been looking at, really looking real close at Hurricane Florence and trying to come up with the latest forecast, look at the model guidance, and it continues to be a very dangerous situation. On the satellite we can see still a pronounced eye, and you can see a lot of the convection surrounding the eye really pointed to a pretty strong system here. And the other part, looking at the structure, you can see some of these rain bands real pronounced, and that's where we see the system is really self-sustaining, and that's when you have a hurricane that continues to strengthen. It's what we call breathing, so to speak. All the structure is absolutely perfect to continue it as strong as it is. And really looking at the latest forecast, this is the 5 p.m. update. And a couple things to note here, and we've been talking about this the entire time about the impacts being well outside the cone. Remember, inside this cone is basically looking at the possibility 2/3 of the time where that center could be, anywhere inside this cone. And as a result, we have that center, but the impacts can stretch well outside this cone. We talk about rainfall, we talk about winds, and actually at the very beginning of the track you can see it. In orange there is actually the radius of hurricane force winds, and in the yellow, go ahead and circle the yellow here, that's the radius of the tropical storm force winds. So you can see well outside that cone, and we got to be ready for that. The other interesting part about this map is when we look at it, we look at these points that we forecast and we draw lines across here, and the closer those lines are together really shows us a slower movement. And the problem we have fast movement, but look what happens once we make landfall and we start to park right over North Carolina with those lines being really close together, and those points 24 hours apart. That spells problems, because the longer it waits, the longer it sits, the more rain that we have. And we'll get to that rainfall in a second. So one of the big things that we talk about, water killing 90% of the people in these tropical systems, and that's why we focus so much on it. Here we're going to be multifaceted when it comes to these impacts. Major hurricane, you're going to have winds. These winds, even a tropical storm still over North Carolina, depression over the North Carolina-Virginia border right here, that means saturated soil, high winds, trees, power lines, loss of power is going to be a big issue when this thing makes landfall and sits there basically for a few days. And the other part we have to talk about is the storm surge. Wherever this makes landfall, just to the right-hand side, you're going to have problems with the storm surge depending on where the landfall is. So if the landfall is here, anywhere North Carolina up to Virginia could see some significant, dangerous, life-threatening storm surge, and a landfall on the left-hand side of the cone could get South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia. So either way, a whole bunch of storm surge, life-threatening storm surge. So you have to listen to those local officials. If you're in an evacuation zone in those storm surge zones and they tell you to leave, that's really important that you do. Rainfall, I did mention the rainfall, and this is the latest guidance that we have when it comes to rainfall. And these are staggering amounts. They're just great rainfall amounts. And in the red here, just to give you an idea, 10 to 15 inches of rain in some of these areas. And there's one small area up in here greater than 15 inches of rain, but don't get too hooked up on the values yet. I think it's really important to realize that it all depends on where the landfall is, how long it waits. But the takeaway here is this. Areas in Virginia, areas in South Carolina, right at the edge here of South Carolina into North Carolina, almost the whole state of Virginia and also North Carolina, you're going to get a staggering amount of rainfall, 10, 15 inches of rain. And a lot of times what you see is when the system stops and stalls, you may see some of these rain bands prolonging with time, and that's where you can still get, even days and days after landfall, you can still get some of those high winds and the heavy rain. So flash flooding is going to be a significant concern. And if you think you're safe because you're away from the coast, that is not true. So well away from the coast, central portions of Virginia and central portions of North Carolina, you could be 100 miles away, several hundred miles in some cases away from the center, and you could still get those dangerous rains that are going to cause the flash flooding. So preparedness is everything. We have time, and really what we've been talking about is the arrival of tropical storm force winds. We really like people to realize that that's the time you need to be done, because it's just too dangerous to go outside. So by Wednesday, this area here, you need to be done with your planning. Further inland, by Thursday, you notice this area, we're talking West Virginia, where you can get some of these winds, also into eastern Tennessee, some of these winds. You need to have all your planning done by Thursday. So have that disaster kit, have that first aid kit, have all sorts of information that you need, maybe a weather radio when the power goes out, have cash, have medicine. just in case. But have water. Really, we talk about a gallon a day per person for 2 or 3 days, and have some food. Have everything that you need to make sure you get through this system and this hurricane the best as possible. So know your risk. Listen to the local officials. Our local offices will be issuing those flood warnings as we start seeing those happen. And this is a pretty significant situation, and we want everybody to be safe. So we'll be keeping an eye on it as everything that we can 24 hours a day here at the Hurricane Center and all across the Weather Service and NOAA, doing everything we can to keep you safe from this hurricane. I appreciate you joining. This has been live right here at the National Hurricane Center's operations area.